Everyone, and welcome to this side event arranged by the Nordic Council of Ministers, Nordic Development Fund, as well as Nordic Environment Finance Corporation, on the topic of Namas as a tool for implementation NDCs. If you would like to know more about this and the Nordic cooperation, as well as this topic, you are more than welcome to come to our pavilion in the blue zone, cell room 2. And the moderator of this session will be Michael Funk, as well from the Nordic Council of Ministers. And my name is Annika Rosing. I work as head of department at the Nordic Council of Ministers. And I will first of all briefly introduce you to the speakers for today's session. This is Mr. Asger Garnak, Chief Advisor from the Ministry of Energy, Utilities and Climate. And we have, Albero Galante, the Managing Director for a consultancy firm, Perspective in Spain, Perspective for Climate Change. And then we have Miss Hanna-Mari Ahonen, Senior Specialist, Climate Finance and Cooperation, GreenStream. And then as the fourth in this row, we have Mr. Kolar, Director for Europe and Asia Programs, Center for Clean Air Policy, CCAP. And the last person is Miss Inga Zachow. She's a technical advisor for GIZ, German Development Corporation. Warm welcome. And I think all presentation will give you a more thoroughly presentation of themselves. A warm welcome once again. And sorry, I will leave the floor to Mr. Asger Garnak.
Thank you very much. Just as a point of clarification, the ministry I'm from is actually based in Denmark, so we still don't have a Nordic joint ministry. Thanks so much for the opportunity to open this event. Namas do not appear in the Paris Agreement, and they are not an issue in the negotiations. So who cares about Namas these days, you could ask? Well, the focus after Paris is, as it should be, shifting heavily toward implementation of the Paris Agreement, and in particular, the NDCs. Namas are important to the Paris Agreement insofar as Namas and the lessons learned from past and ongoing Nama work can contribute to transforming NDCs into concrete, implementable and financeable programs and projects. So we should all care about the lessons from Namas and their contribution going forward, regardless of whether we continue to use the Nama label or not. Working with Namas has helped develop approaches, capacity, and experience that will be at the core of NDC implementation. It has provided a framework for broad-based transformational interventions, often spanning whole sectors of the economy. And in that sense, Nama work is a contributor and catalyst to the Paris Agreement world. Nama work may benefit Paris Agreement implementation in at least 3 and probably several more ways. Firstly, by generating valuable lessons on mitigation action in several sectors. Secondly, as a testing ground for concepts that may then be taken forward at scale, for example, by the Green Climate Fund. And thirdly, by demonstrating interventions that comprise both policy and regulatory activities, as well as private sector mobilization. We shall hear from a great lineup of practitioners who have been working on the ground to support developing country Nama development and implementation. And some of the questions we would like to see addressed include: what are the appropriate institutional structures to deliver Nama implementation? How have Namas evolved over time, and how have they influenced the country NDCs? How is finance mobilization and the role of investors and financial institutions factored into Nama design? And how can the experience around Namas contribute to implementation of the Paris Agreement and in particular NDC implementation? From the Nordic side, we prioritized Nama support in several ways, including through bilateral collaboration and through international funds and programs. We've also acted together in the Nordic Partnership Initiative, and we shall hear about that in a minute. From the Nordic, and also the Danish, of course, point of view, Namas and other mitigation actions should be ambitious, transformational, and supportive of national development priorities and climate objectives. This requires work at several levels, including upstream action to improve policy and regulatory frameworks, support for development of programs and projects to make them financeable, ensuring that financial instruments are available that provide risk sharing and access to finance, and MRV and transparency around the outcomes. Mark is one example. We've engaged in Nama development in various ways, including through funding contributions to the Nama facility, to support for the Nama work of CCAP, which we'll hear about again. We've also integrated Nama development in our bilateral energy collaboration with a number of emerging economies. For example, we are now developing together with Mexico a Nama in the sugarcane industry. So I look forward to hearing from the practitioners. I'll leave the floor. Thanks.
Try this one. Thank you, Asger. The next speaker will be Hanna-Mari Ahonen from GreenStream. I'll put on your.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Hanna. I'm from GreenStream, which is a Helsinki-based energy and climate company. And I have a very particular interest in the Nordic Partnership Initiative because I was part of the feasibility study that's preceded the whole program. And that was in 2010. And it's been 5-6 years now, and I'm really looking forward to telling about the results now, 5-6 years afterwards. So the background here is that the Nordic governments have been working a lot on emission reduction projects, CDM and also JI, and they've been very pioneering in the Kyoto Protocol's international project mechanisms. And they started wondering what would be the way to scale up from project level to sector level, and talked to some host countries and found some active host countries, Peru and Vietnam namely, and decided to start looking for pilots in the ways to scale up from the project level to the sectoral level. And the feasibility study was the first step where you found the right sectors or the suitable sectors in really close collaboration with the host countries. This is really a partnership initiative, and it comes from the Nordic Council of Ministers, which is all the Nordic governments. Also, the Nordic Working Group for Global Climate Negotiations, NOAC, is the active and guiding group here. And then we have some Nordic finance actors, the Nordic Environment Finance Corporation, NEFCO, and the Nordic Development Fund, NDF, who are also involved. And then from the host country sides, we have the Ministry of the Environment in Peru and the Ministry of Construction of Vietnam. We actually went to the Ministry of Energy and they said, look, we've got so much support. Thank you so much for offering more support. Please go elsewhere. And that's not very often you hear that. And so we went to the Ministry of Construction instead. And they were very appreciative of that support. And I also appreciate the Ministry of Energy saying that we already have enough support. Thank you very much. And so the objectives here is to develop concrete and financeable proposals to show how you can start implementing things on a sector level. And there's two ways it contributes to mitigation. One is by providing lessons to the negotiations themselves, but then also serving as a model for others to do the same on the ground, regardless of the speed of the negotiations. I think it's valuable that you have both of these tracks, and you don't need to wait for the negotiations to feed back action on the ground when you have countries that are willing to do that already now. And so the key feature is, and it's absolutely essential, is that it's host country driven. If it's not embedded in what the host country feels is important, it's just not going to happen. And that's very clear. And the way it's been done, it was very much emphasized when we started the process with the MPI. We went to the host countries and said, we're happy to support, but tell us what you need support with. And that doesn't mean you go there once and then you send consultants. It is a very ongoing process under the last 5 years. There's been a lot of consultations on the ground on a regular basis, and also that you have the presence in the country itself and the expertise in the country that stays there once the Nordic period is over. And that means you have to have the ownership and capacity building, not just in the national strategies, you have to have them in the ministries, but also the local municipalities, industries, and other stakeholders, the private sector. So that is a very important part of the NAMA. And then another very important foundation is that everything else, all the mitigation action, all the policies, all the support, all should be based on robust data. If you don't know what's going on, what the emissions are, what the possibilities are, you can't do a smart policy, you can't decide how do you finance smartly, and you don't know where the action is. So it's very much emphasized that it's a no-lose win-win strategy, that you start by getting a really good understanding of the situation and the opportunities and the costs, the barriers and so forth. And then another thing that kind of takes us to the sector level from the project level that the Nordics have been working on, and I also, is that you don't have just individual projects. You have a selection of different types of actions with different time horizons, with different actors. And that's the thing about the NAMAs. Whether we want to call it NAMA in the future, we will have to bring all these elements together for things to work. So you'll have the policy, you have the capacity, you have the pilots, you'll have the financing, all brought together under the NAMA, and all the different actors together as well. And that is the beauty of the NAMAs, because you can't fix one part without looking at the bigger picture. And that should, if it's packaged smartly, bring it to the financial sustainability where the international support is not needed forever. It's needed to bring this together to get it started. But if it's designed in a smart way, it will start paying for itself. It will start implementing itself over time without constant support from outsiders. And that's the idea behind it. And so what the NPI is doing, it's NAMA readiness. So readiness to start implementation. So once our activities are ready, the NAMA is ready to start. It's not finalized, it's ready to start. And that can feel a bit frustrating that after 5 years, you're only ready to start rather than ready to you're actually not being implemented yet. But that is because if you do this planning well, then it's halfway through to implementation, because there's a lot of different parts and bits that you have to get fitted together. You need the mitigation potential, the finance, the data, the policies, the institutions, and then the capacity as well. And so the NAMA readiness proposals under the MPI bring all of these things together. And so in Peru, we picked the municipal waste sector, and in Vietnam, the cement sector. And in Peru, there is a second phase now ongoing, and in Vietnam, the program has been completed in June this year. And so if we start with Peru, it's taking an overall holistic approach to addressing all sorts of challenges in the waste sector. At the same time, there is a policy update, modernization policy for the solid waste sector, and this NAMA feeds into it. So we've been working really closely with the Peruvian authorities to make sure that they fit together and complement. And specifically complementing by bringing economic value to waste, which hasn't been there before, and then that means that the waste management is really not finding alternative ways and getting the actors participating. And so then you increase awareness of the benefits of waste management, also the technical capacity, and then a very important key stakeholder there is the informal sector, the waste pickers. that need to be brought into the picture as well and formalized to the extent possible. And there's a lot of coordination between different ministries because it's a municipal perspective, there's the health perspective and the environmental perspective as well. And then the focus is on municipal solid waste, so household waste and waste from industry and tourism. And it started with a greenhouse gas inventory and then identified some mitigation actions that have the highest potential, then developed an MRV system, the monitoring, reporting, and verification system for these actions. And then at the same time, there's the policy reform. And if you don't have the policy reform, it's really hard to implement the actions as well. So these have to go hand in hand. And then also identifying financial opportunities and then building the capacity. And the actions that Peru has selected to focus on is related to landfill and composting. And there is a lot of activities going on in the waste policy reform, and this is very important, and this is in the hands of Peru. And I'm not going to read all of these out loud, but I would like to highlight one thing. At the moment, municipalities are not allowed to sell waste to the industry. They're only allowed to earn money through taxes. So a change in the law will allow them to sell waste products to industry who can then turn it into something valuable. And these kind of things, if you don't have that in the law, you can't implement the mitigation actions that have been otherwise identified. So really, they go very much hand in hand. And then on the support side, at the moment, we're identifying different financial opportunities and then picking some selected cities to do the applications for these financing institutions. And then there's also incentive financing for those municipalities who are doing particular desired activities. And then there's a certification program being planned. So when you do high quality composting, you get a certificate, and this also creates kind of economic value that could then start making the market work. So there's lots of different types of ways to enhance the economic value of waste. And now this phase 2 is really going from the Nama proposal that had the actions and plans and everything and recommendations to really selecting some municipalities, working with them closely, hand in hand, putting together financial applications and sending them out, for example. And at the same time, there's also going on some analysis and composting on a more detailed level, bringing the MRV into their national waste data system and continued capacity building. So starting to implement some of the recommendations of the first phase. And here's some greetings from Regina from the Ministry of the Environment. I was saying that there's a lot of actors involved, and they have to be brought together for to make use of existing instruments. And then also that NEFCO is saying that it is really important to enable all the activities that have been identified. And going to cement sector in Vietnam, they focused on the energy efficiency of cement because it's a very big energy user. And they started with a database, then worked on baselines for looking at different scenarios to what direction the cement sector is going. It's in desperate need of a modernization. Then looked at the mitigation opportunities, developed a measurement system, identified barriers and support, and then institutions on how to get all of this together. And the phase now it's been completed now from first the design, then a lot of extensive consultations. And here the key has been to actually reach the cement companies on the ground. And they have been all over the country and on all of the companies, and they reached 85% of the cement sector. So the database covers almost all of the emissions there. That's a great achievement. And based on that data, they brought this analysis on a great level, which brought together a Nama readiness plan that is then ready to start looking for financing from different. And so this is a very highly ambitious Nama proposal. And the cooperation here has been really impressive in terms of bringing it all the way down to the cement companies. And cement will be an important part of the Vietnamese NDC as well. It's a significant energy user and then also significant potential for improvement. And the thing is, a lot of these activities are actually financially viable. So there are some barriers that have to be removed, but once those barriers are gone, the companies can implement these mitigation actions on their own. They don't need a whole lot of financing. They need a little bit of financing to get started and get rid of some of the barriers. And some of those barriers are policy related, so they don't even cost money, they just require host country commitment. And so the next steps would be to apply for some international support on some of the enabling activities that can then unlock an amazing amount of emission reductions in this sector. And then set up an operating unit in the country to coordinate that. And then go to the host, the companies who actually have the data, but don't have the system to deal with the data, report it onwards. So just a little bit extra would get the data into a useful form so that then it can contribute to the inventories, it can contribute to financiers and so forth. And there's some pilot investments that you could start off with just to show the companies that, look, this is really working, this is worthwhile, and it's completely doable. Because demonstration is extremely powerful. And so, as the Ministry of Construction is saying, this will be a very important part of the NDC of Vietnam. And since it's such an integral part, then it should be able to attract the financial support internationally, but also domestically to start implementing these things. And then the collaboration has been, as I said, very great and valuable. And so this is my last slide. Sorry for speaking so fast. But yeah, so lessons for Paris implementation as well. As I see it, Namas came before Paris as an inspiration to really build some confidence. And there's a lot of potential and there's a lot of things that can be done. And that gave the confidence to build up the NDCs in the first place. And now that they're put forward in Paris and after, the same Namas that first inspired are now the tools for implementing it. So I see the Namas being before and after an extremely important part of NDCs. And it also translates these high-level things into actual meetings with locals, meeting and going into cement companies, starting to look at what data they have, putting, Excel sheets for them, sitting down with them to fill them out and so forth. So really making it into the action on the ground. And existing structures are very important and should be the starting point because we're never starting from scratch. And then finally, it will only work if the policy environment is encouraging the activities that we want to achieve. And all of this work is needed if you want financing, because you need to have all of these blocks well thought through for attracting financing. And the final lesson is that readiness takes time, but I'd like to add it's totally worth it. So there's some more information. There's lots of information there. So I hope that will inspire anybody else doing similar things. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Hanna-Mari. The Nordic Partnership Initiative, you can also find more information on norden.org/NPI that sort of sums up the whole thing. The Nordic Council of Ministers launched this at COP17 in Durban. So we've come a long way since that. And we are actually about to hear more on that, the road from Namas to NDCs. And our next presenter. Sorry, I have to multitask here, so I have to bring up the presentation as well. So Inga Zachow from GIS will tell us about the linkages between Namas and NDCs.
Good morning or early, it's not yet afternoon, but hello to everyone. My name is Inga Zachow from GIZ, from the German. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at this event. As I said, I work with GIZ, focusing on mitigation related issues, and we advise the Ministry of Development Cooperation and Economic Cooperation in climate-related issues. I've also previously been involved in a global INDC support project supported by the BMUB, the German Ministry of Environment, in which we have supported more than 20 countries in the development of INDCs. Do I have, oh, it's here, sorry. So my presentation will focus on the linkages between Namas and INDCs based on country examples. So I'll present two examples from Namas, one from Tunisia and one from Vietnam, which showcase how the Namas have been integrated in the INDC or NDC of that country. To start with, well, you have already touched upon these issues. You all know INDCs are at the core of the Paris Agreement. And although Namas are not explicitly mentioned in the Paris Agreement, enhanced action will be vital to achieve the 2.5 or the 2 or 1.5 degree objective in the Paris Agreement. And as outlined in Article 4.2 of the Paris Agreement, all parties shall pursue domestic mitigation measures with the aim of achieving the objectives of such NDCs. So Namas will have a key role in the NDC implementation, although not explicitly mentioned in the Paris Agreement. There have been 189 parties representing 95% of global greenhouse gas emissions that have submitted INDCs. Now, I checked this morning, maybe the number has already changed. It is already 100 NDCs that have been submitted to the NDC registry of the UNFCCC, together with the respective ratification documents of the party. And in parallel, there has been large experiences in the development of Namas. Today, there have been 203 Namas that have been developed at this stage. The ECOFIS ECN mitigation momentum report has just been published last week and showcases the most recent developments. And also, just to highlight one last fact, that more than 1/3 of developing countries' INDCs refer to Namas. Before I go into the two country examples, I just quickly show what GIZ is doing in the context of INDCs and Namas. So we, as I already mentioned, we have been supporting more than 20 countries in the development of their INDCs. These are the countries highlighted here. We have been closely collaborating with other organizations, including UNDP, Climate Analytics, and also other organizations. Apart from that, GIZ is engaged not only in the NAMA development, but also in policy advice on climate-related issues. I just picked some examples. So we are doing policy advice. We have a Mexican-German Climate Alliance program. We have a wide range of sectoral projects in the renewable energy sector, the energy sector, the transport sector, the waste sector, in all different kind of sectors, and also advice on the more cross-cutting issues such as transparency, MRV systems, where we have projects in, for instance, Tunisia, Ghana, and the Dominican Republic, and also on climate finance readiness. To start with the first example, the NAMA development in Tunisia. Tunisia has actually quite early engaged in the NAMA process and was even one of the pioneering countries in the drafting of several NAMAs. And what you see on this slide is that there's currently 5 different NAMAs in different sectors, including the cement sector, the Tunisian solar plan, the efficiency and renewable energy in buildings. There's a NAMA in the forestry sector, one in the waste sector, and then there's also another NAMA in the city SFAX, which is under development. But this is only at local level. All the other 5 NAMAs are at the national level. And all or many of these NAMAs already contribute to national targets. This is specifically the case for the cement sector NAMA, the Tunisian solar plan NAMA, but also the waste water treatment NAMA and the renewable energy in buildings NAMA, which contribute to the energy sector targets, which aim at achieving 30% renewables in the electricity production by 2030, and then an 30% increase in energy efficiency by 2030. To start with the first example, which concerns the cement sector, which is one of the NAMAs we have been supporting in Tunisia from the 5 Namas in total. So the cement sector is a very strategic sector in Tunisia. There's 9 plants which are operated mostly by the private sector. And this Nama aims at reducing greenhouse gas emission profiles in the cement sector. The cement sector overall contributes to almost 10% of the national greenhouse gas emission in Tunisia, so very energy intensive, emission intensive sector. And this Nama has several components. It includes capacity building components, technical assistance. There's results-based financial mechanism that is currently being designed, also with the aim of upscaling action towards a carbon market and accessing carbon units. It aims at unlocking regulatory barriers, especially for wind power, includes activities on co-processing and also the cement market segments, reducing the clinker. The coordinating entity is the National Agency for Energy Consumption, the RNMÖ, and this project is co-funded by the European Commission and the German Development Corporation. And what is most striking with this example, coming to the linkages with the Nama, is that this Nama in the cement sector represents 15% of Tunisia's NDC target. Here you can see the linkage between the Nama and Tunisia's NDC or NDC. They ratified the agreement in October. So the overall objective of the NDC is to reduce, it's actually an emission intensity target. So it aims at minus 41% emission intensity by 2030 with the base year of 2010. And this has been one of the basis for the Nama and also the NDC development in Tunisia, that there was a parallel process of finalizing the national greenhouse gas inventory and also the biennial update report, which has been submitted in December 2014, and that provide a good basis and solid databases for the development of the Nama and the NDC. And that's also where the base year of 2010 comes from. You also see on the that the energy sector is the most important sector in Tunisia, accounting for more than 60% of the emissions. And the NDC is based on existing strategies, including the renewable energy efficiency, and Tunisian solar power plan strategy is based on adaptation strategies and on the national climate change strategy, and makes explicit reference to Namas, especially the cement Nama, which will be accounted for in parts for the industry sector and in parts for the energy sector. Coming to the second example from Vietnam, this is Nama project GIZ has been and is supporting emissions in the transport sector in Vietnam are increasing rapidly. This comes together with problems with regard to health and air quality. So this Nama aims at contributing to sustainable development of the transport sector in Vietnam and a greenhouse gas reduction by building on 3 components. So the first is by introducing low carbon bus technologies, by conducting operational improvements. This could be more efficient tires, for instance, and then also by shifting from private to public transport by a more efficient public transport system, and improve the management by different modes by optimizing roads, etc. And the expected results also here, I at least find it striking, could achieve by 2030 2% of annual transport emissions. In 2030, it includes a wide range of co-benefits, and the lead institution is the Ministry of Transport and the Ministry of Environment in Vietnam, and they have been supported by GIZ on behalf of BMUB and UNDP. And the NAMA will be developed in 2 phases. So the first phase is from 2017 to 2020, focusing on only 3 pilot cities, which you can see on the right-hand side. So this is Hanoi, Hue, and Can Tho. And in the second phase, it seeks at upscaling this NAMA to all cities in Vietnam. So this will be from 2021 to 2030. So GIZ is providing technical assistance and is also supporting in the financial component of the NAMA. This is just to quickly provide you some further information on the measures in both components. So on the technical side, it is targeted to review global best practices for buses. It aims at monitoring the performance of the low carbon buses. It includes training and capacity building components for the public transport planning, integrated by, for instance, integrated ticketing, public transport authorities, eco-driving modes, etc. It aims at an enhanced policy development and facilitation for the National Urban Transport Support Program. It supports the establishment and operationalization of an MRV system for urban transport. This includes also tools for measuring the greenhouse gas impact and also aims at an improved NAMA management administration and supports the design of a financial structure and proposal in phase 2. With regard to the financial component, it aims at a grant-based incentive fund, which will cover the incremental costs, but also compensates for additional costs. And approximately 70% of these investment costs for the hybrid buses will come from regular credit facilities. And furthermore, there's financial incentives planned, which would include, for instance, low rolling resistance tires, idling stop devices, or eco-driving trainings. This NAMA has also been submitted to the NAMA facility in the 4th call, so just a few weeks ago in October. And with regard to the linkage with the INDC, so the INDC target of Vietnam aims at an 8% reduction by 2030 compared to a business as usual scenario, and 25% reduction with international support. The transport sector is one of the key sectors in the INDC. There have been concrete measures that have been identified in the INDCs. As you can see here, it's the transformation of passenger transport and a goal of 15% motorbikes users that should switch to public transport in urban areas. There's also a very close linkage with the existing transport development strategy, which aims at increasing public transport model share from currently 10% to 25 to 30% by 2020. And this also contributes to the transformational character of the INDC. It has a high potential for scaling up, and replication action provides good knowledge and learning potential and contributes to regulatory and framework. And so what kind of lessons can we draw from these examples that could help us in the process of NDC implementation and to translate INDCs into concrete targets? This is not only taken from those 2 examples, but also from a wide range of other activities. So what we consider important, and some of these, or actually many of these aspects have already mentioned by my previous speaker and also in the introduction, which shows supposedly their importance. So first of all, it's key to embed the Namas into long-term vision. This could be or should be the NDC, low emission development strategy, or national climate change strategy, as it was the case, for instance, in Tunisia, or sectoral level strategies, as we have also seen in the case of Vietnam with the transferred development strategy, but also in Tunisia with the energy strategy. The next aspects refer to the stakeholder engagement and the question of ownership, which has already been addressed as well. So it is important to ensure continuous, transparent, and inclusive stakeholder process, which has been the case in Vietnam and Tunisia, not only in the NAMA process, but also in the INDC process. In both countries, the NAMA process has already contributed to enhancing the awareness on technical questions and raised the capacity that has helped to get the stakeholders on board and ensure their buy-in for the INDC process. It is also important to identify a lead institution or a line ministry that is leading the process, which can be some kind of champion that helps to drive the process. This has been in Tunisia, the ANMO, the National Energy Authority, and in Vietnam, the NAMA process has been, or this particular NAMA has been driven mainly by the Ministry of Transport and the Ministry of Environment. Closely linked to this, and also part of the ownership, is also involving a wide range of stakeholders to enhance local capacities. In Tunisia, for instance, local consultancies, for instance, the APEX, have been involved and had a key role in the preparation of the NAMA concepts. Then it also requires the political and financial commitment from the national level, from the government level. In Tunisia, for instance, the climate change is part of the national constitution, which shows their commitment. And also financially, all the NAMAs developed in Tunisia include a national component and an international component, so a conditional and an unconditional component, and they are willing to finance parts of their NAMAs. And then it is, of course, key to have a sustainable financial mechanism, which includes, first of all, to identify a national financial institution that can manage substantial amounts of funds to ensure effective allocation of financial resources. In Tunisia, for instance, this is the National Energy Transition Fund, and also to have a robust, or to establish a robust appropriate financing mechanism to make barrier analysis and understand the landscape before developing the NAMA concept. It is also key, as we have seen with the example of Tunisia, to put the private sector at center stage. As mentioned in the example, in the cement sector industry, the private sector has a key role in Tunisia. And one last point I would like to highlight, which has already been raised before, is to have a robust MRV system and a solid greenhouse gas inventory. This has also been the case, especially in Tunisia, where the development and or finalization of the greenhouse gas inventory and the biannual update report coincided with the development of the INDC. So what this shows is that NAMAs have helped pave the way for INDCs. A wide range of technical capacities have been built and experience acquired during the NAMA process that have provided a very good information basis for the INDC process. Here you can see different bits and pieces that contributed to the INDC development and led to inform the INDC. And this brings me already to my second last slide, the benefits of NAMAs for the INDC implementation process. So NAMAs can serve as an instrument and provide very good basis for disaggregating national NDC targets to various sectors, especially for those countries that have not yet engaged in the development of Namas, but that have now set a national target and wants to convert them into concrete actions. So this would be kind of a top-down approach rather. Then it also provides for the opportunity of bottom-up approaches. It helps to take stock and analyze actions at sectoral level. It provided information on setting up MRV systems, helps to upscale existing actions, access and mobilize international, but also domestic finance, and enhancing institutions at national level. So to conclude, we have already heard this in the introduction as well. I fully agree. Namas can be a key implementation vehicle for achieving NDC targets. Namas can also support other critical elements of the Paris Agreement, including climate finance, transparency, and can guide, NDCs can guide NAMA development and vice versa. And if closely linked, they can both mutually reinforce each other and contribute to enhancing ambition over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Inga. And we're almost on time, so we will move on to the next speaker, Albero Galante from Perspectives Climate Change, who will take us even further, because he's not just talking about linkages between Namas and NDCs. He sees the Namas as pillars of NDC implementation. So we're looking forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, to all of you for joining us in the discussion today. Nordic colleague here, some lessons learned for this process, especially in Latin America. And I think this has been already said, but it's I think it's worth insisting on this concept that the Namas do not appear in the Paris Agreement, which has led, I think, to some concern in the implementing countries, whether now, after all this effort, now they have to move forward to something completely different, and therefore to give up of the previous work. And today, I think with this event, we want to convey the message that this is, of course, not the case. That now that the Paris Agreement has entered into force, the focus should be now on NDC implementation. And in this sense, Namas are a very useful tool to move from these high-level commitments in the NDCs to action on the ground to reduce emissions through the NDC implementation. And as Namas paved the way for NDC implementation, I would like to thank also the previous speakers, because they also paved the way to my presentation today. I think I don't need to convince anyone that this is that Namas are an important tool to implement NDCs, but just in case there is some skeptical in the room, I would like to propose this syllogism here. Like probably all of you know it, that under two premises, human beings are mortal, and then Socrates is a human being, one can infer that Socrates is mortal, right? I would like to adjust this a little bit and to what I will call the Nama Syllogism, to reflect, because we have, on the one hand, all mitigation instruments are tools for NDC implementation, and all of them are needed. And we'll see it throughout the presentation. We are talking about Namas, but also other mitigation instruments. CDM is also one of them. But Namas are also one of them. Namas are mitigation instruments. And therefore, I think under those two premises, we can really say, that Namas are tools for NDC implementation. And I hope with this, we can really, close this debate and then move forward to the implementation of the NDCs to the practical level. And I would like to say that from our point of view, Namas are not only tools for NDC implementation, but actually are crucial pillars of NDC implementation. It is true that often, especially under the Paris rush that led to very quick processes, NDCs were developed top-down. and they were theoretically based on an economically ideal mitigation path at the national level without being concrete on how to really achieve it. But now, if we want to remove this I, the intended from the NDC, and we want to implement NDCs, we can build on the sum of Namas. And as I said, Namas, not only Namas, but of course, Namas as one of the tools, as one of the building blocks for these NDCs. And why is that? What is that we can learn from these NAMA processes? We have seen more than 200 Namas in the pipeline. What is that it's important on Namas, and what is that can be useful for reaching NDC implementation? Is that, first of all, for a number of sectors and initiatives, the barriers have been already identified. They are now well known. Baselines have been also assessed. And with the CDM, there was already very interesting lessons learned on baseline, but they were still mainly at the project level, then the program level. But with Namas, now they have been put in place a good number of baseline at the sectorial level, but also at the national level. And this is something which has added value, and this is something we should use to build on NDCs. And likewise, MRV systems have been developed. We have been developing MRV systems, and as my also previous colleagues explained, for different sectors in different countries, even for the same sector, for different Namas initiatives in one sector, in one country. And this is even more interesting because this is exactly what NDCs are about, in implementing mitigation measures in one sector at the national level. And of course, the financing needs have been discussed. They have been identified. In some occasions, they have been even successful in attracting national, but also international financing. And this also, I like to reiterate that when a program, when an initiative is framed as a NAMA, the willingness to attract financing both at the national level, but also at the national level, it's higher. And therefore, we should make use of this tool. And regarding the baselines and the MRV system, of course, because I mentioned there have been a lot of experience there and many baselines and MRV systems have been developed, and now we need to ensure consistency. I'm sure an MRV system for the waste NAMA in Peru, it's a little bit different than the waste NAMA in India, even if in this case, for instance, the same group of people developed. And this, if we really want to account all the emission reductions all the Namas in a country achieve for the NDC, there should be some, there should be consistency, of course, throughout the among the baselines and MRV systems in the country. This is exactly what we have been trying to do when we at Perspectives have been supporting developing country mitigation policies. We had the pleasure of being involved in the first phase of the Nordic Partnership Initiative on the waste NAMA in Peru, and also in the cement NAMA in Vietnam. And this year also we have been working in other initiatives, rather at the NAMA level, moving from identification and development closer to implementation, of course, not under implementation, but at least supporting the countries to move forward in other countries like Mexico, like El Salvador, Indonesia, or India. But here today, I would like just to share with you some lessons learned from NDC policy paper in Costa Rica. This was, as I said, a policy paper to support the government from Costa Rica in build or construct their NDC. There was the idea behind was really to provide guidance back in 2015, because now everyone is used to the topic. But by then, a couple of years ago, also the developing countries, they needed to understand better what is the process and how to make use of what they already had at hand, which were mainly NAMAs, to move and to develop the NDC, which was then communicated before Paris. And this policy paper had two main sections. One was the assessment of Namas that could serve as building blocks for the country NDC, and then to provide methodological guidance to promote the country's NDC process. And here I will focus only on the first one, on this assessment on how Namas could serve as building blocks for Costa Rica's NDC. First, very important was to assess the institutional framework, institutional and policy framework. And in Costa Rica, there was this carbon neutrality target, comprehensive national strategy on climate change, and then a concrete action climate program, it's called, and several sectorial plans and policies on climate change, some of them, but also on other priorities for the country. Something that we find very often is that for a sector, they call priority, which for under Nama, we would call co-benefits. So we needed to understand and assess this framework before moving forward. Then we identified some sectorial initiatives, which we could really call Namas. And there were 6 at that time. There was the coffee Nama, the livestock Nama, housing Nama, the solid waste, the biomass energy Nama, and the urban transport Nama. If we would say, okay, this country has these 6 Namas already in place, so let's take into account the mitigation potential of all of them in the short to mid-term, so that we can come up with our commitment. I think this would be a bit unrealistic because none of them were sufficiently developed as to take them into account. Therefore, what we did was to assess. We carry out a multi-criteria assessment where we assessed some parameters. One was the mitigation potential. Has this been already estimated or not? And if yes, was it low or high? The availability of data was the second parameter because this was crucial. Has good access to historical data in order to develop the baseline, but also to be able to define the MRV system. We need to know what is the level of detail of the data availability in the country, historically for the baseline, but also the intended one for the MRV system for the implementation of the initiatives. Then the time frame. Some initiatives, most of them were under development after identification, but still being designed, being developed, but not under implementation phase, which is actually what we were looking for. Then the financing needs. In some occasions, those were not identified yet at this stage. And the same with co-benefits, barriers, and risks. Have they been identified? And if so, can we say there would be really, can we overcome those barriers? Or there will be something really which will prevent us to implement these Namas in the short term? And after this assessment, we came to the conclusion that it was worthwhile selecting 2 Namas, which were the Nama coffee and the Nama on livestock. Here, some conclusions that we learned about at least the challenges. First of all was the alignment with the national policy. And I said before, those Namas were under the Agriculture Ministry. The other day, I attended one side event also at the Nordic Pavilion where Andrea Mesa, the head of the climate change office in Costa Rica, said, before Namas, the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment, we were sort of enemies because they were really defending different goals. One wanted to just prevent environment, whereas the other wanted to increase productivity. And through this, thanks to this Nama development process, they have come together, and now they have a place and a date on the agenda where they sit together and they say, okay, how can we achieve emission reduction in these 2 sectors while also promoting the co-benefits that the Minister of Agriculture wanted to achieve? And this is something worth mentioning. And then the financial structure definition, which is usually one of the key barriers for the projects to access the finance. I think the technical issue is usually not the main barrier. It's very interesting as a consultant, but it's not rocket science, I mean, to develop a baseline, an MRV, and so on, but it's how to structure the financial part of the NAMA to move to the implementation phase. Here, I just would like to present very briefly, you know, a screenshot of this multi-criteria tool for the assessment of Namas, where we have all the 6 Namas which were assessed, and then we have different columns where we evaluated. This is just the results, but as I said, the mitigation potential, data availability, the time frame or development status, the financing needs, the co-benefits, and the barriers. And then after this evaluation, we came with a scoring system. Maximum was 30. As you will see here, the 2 first Namas score above 20. And actually those 2 Namas, then we double checked another the 2 ones that the government submitted to the UNFCCC registry. So there was a good reason behind. And just to conclude here, I would like to say that the current NDC ambition levels of developing countries cannot be achieved without serious mitigation policies. Especially, or the need of stringent policies increases even with the ratcheting up of NDCs, which will happen every 5 years. So I don't think we will go for lower ambition levels, but higher. And this has also been said before. There are around 100 NDCs already submitted to the UNFCCC, around 200 Namas. If we think that at least one NDC should be composed by several Namas, I think we don't need less Namas, we need more Namas if we really want to achieve this ambition level. And that's why the reason of this is because these mitigation policies are best designed or are very well designed as Namas, as we said, because of those reasons, the MRV system in place, the institutional framework and so. But of course, Namas require international support, both technically and financially. And actually, supported Namas go into this NDC's conditional mitigation component. Many countries, and we also saw it in the presentations before, they have submitted conditional targets or components which are in some occasions even higher than the unconditional ones. And that is where they are requesting support. And I'm convinced that for those initiatives which are framed as Namas, chances will be higher. But still, one has to recognize the current difficulties to access international climate finance, and therefore a mix of financing sources should be harnessed. And here I would like just to mention, of course, national budget, so national finance, but also at the international level, we heard about the Nama facility. Of course, we have the GCF, and hopefully for those, if the ambition is sufficiently high, we'll need to make use of the Paris Agreement mechanisms, which are under the Article 6. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. And Alberto, the next speaker will be Stan Kolar from the Center for Clean Air Policy, and he'll take us all the way into the of this. And yes, I will set up your presentation.
This is a bit slow, this.
So good morning, afternoon. I'm Stan Kolar from the Center for Clean Air Policy. We are US-based but globally Latin America and Asia. I am a director of Europe and Asia programs for CCAP. And thank you very much to the organizers for having us here this morning. We are a nonprofit institution that is originally formed in the US to promote acid rain legislation. We have been behind the first emission trading scheme in the world, actually helping to set up in the US the acid rain, the sulfur dioxide trading scheme. We did the first JI project in the world in the Czech Republic, where I come from. And recently, we've been helping countries design Namas, NDCs, and been very active in the climate change debate. Our key program is called the Mitigation Action Implementation Network, MAIN. We are active with that program in 10 Latin American countries and 6 Asian countries. And so I cannot agree more with all of my colleagues who spoke before. They really brought up very key issues in Namas development, making Namas part of NDCs. I really couldn't agree more. I will go into some of those elements that are key in developing successful Namas, some of the potential barriers in the way of greater Nama implementation. We all know this graph. This is called the implementation gap. This actually is an old one. I understand the new number is over 200 Namas under development and only 19 under implementation. So people are asking, why is there this implementation gap? Is there not enough money? And I wouldn't really call it implementation gap. I would rather call it a development gap. I've seen a lot of those Namas that are in the database, and frankly speaking, they're not ready to be financed. They're missing some key elements that would make a successful project financeable, or successful program financeable. In our experience, there are 3 key elements, and my colleagues have spoken about all of them, and I will go into some details based on our experience that make Nama or program a successful one. Well-defined financing mechanism that address specific financing barriers. That has to be underlined by detailed financial analysis of a particular sector, projects, or programs. Pipeline of feasible financeable bankable projects that will attract not just the public and international finance, but also private finance. My colleague spoke a lot about host country contribution and ownership. This is really a critical issue. I will get into that within the context of the energy sector. And what will make the Nama transformational is a clear and long-term policy trajectory contributing to the theory of change. Again, I will touch that with respect to the energy sector. So closing the development and implementation gap will require a significant pipeline of financeable Namas. This is graphically illustrating what I've just said. A Nama, successful Nama, has to have some stability, it has to have 3 legs at least. The first one is the policy and institutional change that the project that is financed is addressing. Financing mechanism that removes the financial barriers that is in the way of these projects being carried out. Hopefully, the financing mechanism enables private sector financing, takes care of some initial risks, for example, that will enable private capital to get involved in the sector. Because as we have all heard, the international climate finance, the public climate finance will just not be enough to bring about the Paris Agreement goal. And third, the project pipeline is a critical element in order to attract private sector investments. You have to have concrete projects that provide the mitigation targets and that attract banks as well as equity investors. So what are the barriers in our way, in way of increasing the volume of successful Namas? Well, first, we think that the large banks, the international banks, the multilateral development banks, they may have sometimes sort of modality shortage. They may not have the institutional mandate, engagement modalities, or budget to handle all of the project development elements that can take years to bring about. And to get the domestic buy-in of all key stakeholders. Again, I will mention in a minute the energy sector and how concretely that looks like. Lack of domestic ownership, lack of engagement modality from international banks. International banks are really the only ones, or the multilaterals are the only ones who can right now bring in bring up the scale to make a difference in Namas and under the Paris Agreement. And because of the lack of engagement modalities on the part of the multilaterals, we may see many projects, many potentially good projects slipping through the cracks because they just do not have the necessary means of addressing projects at their very beginning. If you go to any country, there will be always people who will see something that other people don't see. And very often the people are on the middle levels in government, in the private sector. And these middle level or even lower level people, they will see a potential in an idea. We all may see a tree trunk. But this person may see the end result. And it's just a question of removing the ballast and letting show what is actually hidden in the tree trunk. And I think that's sometimes the same way with potentially good ideas that can potentially transform into a very successful NAMA project. But as I've said, the modalities of some multinational banks doesn't allow for the time and effort to be spent discussing with all potential stakeholders and trying to chisel out the idea from a rough tree trunk into a beautiful statue. Second, every successful project has to have, as my colleague have said, full country ownership. And this can be a real challenge, especially in the fast transforming energy sector. Successful NAMA has to copy what is going on in the energy sector. And as we all know, the energy sector is transforming everywhere in the world. The old ways of doing business are increasingly giving way to new ways. It used to be that there was energy generation, transmission, distribution, and consumer protection. That all is giving way because of the falling prices of renewable energy, falling prices of storage, smart grids, and from consumers, you all of a sudden have an entirely new class of service providers. They actually can provide a lot of service to the grid. That can be of great benefit to distribution companies, transmission companies, but of course it threatens the old way of doing business, not just in developing countries, obviously in developed countries as well. The problem is that the policy and regulatory establishment in every country, not just developing, hasn't yet taken up, hasn't yet reacted enough to these changing realities. And as a result, designing a NAMA, for example, in the energy sector is very challenging because you need to bring in the project institutions and entities and stakeholders who are doing energy transmission, who are doing energy distribution. At first sight, it may appear that net metering project is about the consumers, just enabling consumers to buy solar rooftop, very small size, and that's all there is to it. But in fact, no, because in a given country, solar rooftop does threaten this distribution establishment. It threatens even the transmission establishment. They are regulated by different entities than the consumers who install the solar rooftops. So you need to bring in the government stakeholders, the regulators, those other functions of the grid. That can be very challenging because the initial stakeholder could be, excuse me, a government entity that is in charge only with consumers and enabling rooftop solar. Getting the other stakeholders on board and driving in the same direction can be very challenging. But in order for that particular NAMA to make a difference, to be transformational, you need to get them on board. And so for this reason alone, it can take a number of years to get everybody on board in order to create a real transformational impact of the project. So policymakers and regulators, they need to caught up with the new realities of the energy sector. We're really seeing changes everywhere in the world. You see it in California, which is very progressive, but other American states are very backward in terms of addressing these new realities. It's really, if you look at the 50 American states, you can see a microcosm of what's happening around the world as well. And the third challenge sometimes is unreasonable expectations, what a Nama can do and should do. If I stay with the solar rooftop model, in many countries, it already makes economic sense. Prices are high enough so that for residential, commercial, or industrial customers, it actually makes economic sense to install solar rooftop to take care of some of their consumption. Yet, it may not be happening in that country. And the government may have an idea, okay, let's give people grants, or let's give them loans, concessional loans, to make them buy solar rooftop. But that is not really the right way to address it. If it's economical already, it's not happening not because there are lack of economical incentives. It's happening because there must be some other barriers in the way of solar rooftop, for example. There could be very cumbersome, lengthy permitting processes that scare people away from installing rooftop legally. There are countries where half the installations are illegal with substandard equipment, for example, that is not delivering on the promised generation, that breaks down very often. This gives solar rooftop very bad name. So climate finance is not to support that which is already economical. It is to support removing barriers and creating enabling conditions. And that could be very challenging, actually, finding the right balance between what is transformational and what is feasible. Because what is transformational oftentimes means change, but what is feasible is best if you don't need change, if it is feasible under current conditions. And for a successful Nama, I think you have to have both. And that again is a challenge in developing the project. Over time, you have to find the right balance between the transformational and the feasible. So summarizing it, my last, I believe, 2 slides. Development of a Nama requires combining policy, technical assistance, and financial mechanism. And very often we see that some of these are being addressed or being tacked onto the project, nice to have. Well, we really fulfill the formal requirements to have this, but really it has to be there in equal parts. The early project development phase is very critical. It's where people on the ground can see the statue that is hidden inside the tree trunk. And you need to get to those people to help you identify where that statue is and what is the ballast that needs to be removed, what are the barriers that need to be removed for the statue to materialize. And then, of course, full project development, where you go through policy design, analysis, design the financial mechanism, which has to be underwritten by very detailed financial analysis of what is possible under given conditions or what conditions need to be changed to bring about the transformational change. And last, as I've mentioned, the pipelines of successful projects. So developing a successful Nama can take a long time, as you all know, but very often it is worth it. CCAP is now implementing one funded Nama by the Nama facility, the Colombian Transport-Oriented Development Nama. And we have under development other Namas, as you can see on the slide, in Colombia, Pakistan, Philippines, in Vietnam. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stan. Thank you to all our panelists. So we've come a long way since the inception of the Nordic Partnership Initiative that the Nordic Council of Ministers launched back in 2011 at COP17. We heard about linkages, we heard about even pillars, Namas as pillars of the NDCs, and we came all the way to the ground and into the tree trunk. So I think that there's no doubt that everyone here agrees that the work with Namas is crucial for the implementation of NDCs, which is what, after all, we're here for. I would just like, we have 5 minutes left. If anyone has a question down here, yes?
Thank you. I am Patricia Turrey from Peru. My question is, I would like to know as much detail as possible how to involve private sector, because many countries are relying on private sector investment, and I heard that private sector finance should be involved, but in developing countries, emerging economies, the levels of private sector finance are under construction or in bit of problems because the levels of finance are kind of a barrier. But I believe that the dynamism, how can I say, the speed of Namas could be elevated, could be more quicker, involving private sector in some way, and I don't see that. Many countries, including Peru, are designing Namas with only public sector and not involving private sector, or only just as a stakeholder in some stages of the elaboration, which I believe it has to be changed. But I would love to see or to hear some details about this.
So who was the question for? The question is for everybody. We have 3 minutes, so I don't know if everybody, does anyone like to answer? Yes, Albero.
Yes, thanks for the question. And I would like to answer by giving 2 examples actually from your country, from Peru. One is from the waste Nama, because there, as it was presented, there are 3 mitigation options to own landfill gas flaring and uses to power generation. And the third one was on composting. And for composting, of course, you can do that, but you need a composting market to be in place. You need you need to create the demand, and you need to enable the conditions for this market to be really implemented. And again, it's not a technical issue. There are very nice experiences in Peru on how to do composting. But now the next phase of the project will assess how to create these enable conditions for creating this market for the composting sector. And the same happens with the cement Nama also in Peru, for instance, where one of the mitigation options identified was co-processing, the use of the waste on the for the cement industry. And the private sector was really willing to use the waste, but again, they needed to go to the landfills, ask for the waste, and even they couldn't get it. Even if they would like to pay for this, there was not a law by law. So the only way also to engage in those 2 examples, the private sector, is by creating the enable conditions, and it's all about policy to removing the barriers.
Thank you, Albert. We have one more question, the final question here.
Thank you. I'm Abdurrahman from Morocco. My question is to the last speaker. I liked the example about the tree trunk, but I will have two concerns. How to manage the risks, because there is very important risk to be taken, and also the failures, because before starting sculpturing the tree trunk, we don't know what are we getting as a result. How to manage those 2 things?
I guess the risk is inherent, and it will eventually be addressed by developing the capacity and the skills in the countries. You already, in every country, you have people who have good skills, good capacity, and you just need to add more people to it. You need to develop, they need to develop their skills to a higher level, and eventually it's a question of having a better batting average eventually. You will obviously destroy some tree trunks, and they may not turn out as nice as in the picture, but that's inherent in the business, I think.
Okay, thank you very much again to our panel, and thank you to everyone attending here today. The Nordic Council of Ministers not only has been pioneering the work with Namas, we are also here present. We have a small stand here at the side events tent. And if you go further down to delegation tent 2, we have a pavilion. You can find programs up here for our exciting side event program, and you're welcome to come also for morning coffee. Every day at 9:30, we have exciting talks there where you can sit down and enjoy your coffee. So welcome all of you, and thank you for coming here today.
But it's also, there's a lot of